There's perhaps no clearer indication of the convergence of information technology and operational technology than the increased use of Ethernet network. But the conversion has not been without bumps in the road. Full-featured managed switches are great. From the IT world, they feature an impressive array of options and functionality, perhaps too many for the OT technologists tasked with configuration, and at a price point to match. Unmanaged switches, on the other hand, are relatively unsophisticated devices that cost far less, but lack the security and redundancy features of increasing importance. Only there was an option that was cost-effective, secure, reliable, and easy. Hello, this is Keith Larson, editor of Control Magazine and ControlGlobal.com, and welcome to this Solution Spotlight episode of our Control Amplified podcast, sponsored today by WAGO. With me today to talk about a network switch option designed specifically for the needs of OT applications and the priorities and skill sets of the engineers and technicians who work with them. Charlie Norz, Product Manager for I/O Systems with WAGO USA. Welcome, Charlie. A real pleasure to chat with you today. Thanks for joining.
Yeah, thanks, Keith. I appreciate the opportunity and enjoy talking to you about networking on the plant floor.
Absolutely. Well, maybe to start things off, perhaps you can talk a little bit more about those fancy IT managed Ethernet switches from the IT world. When you go to deploy those in an OT environment, what are some of the issues that might arise when you go to a full IT switch, more of a plant floor environment?
Well, I would say that, as you know, these managed switches or fully managed switches really came out of the IT world, right, where you're in office environments, a lot of different types of traffic, and really not deterministic traffic. So I still would say that fully managed switches offer network administrators a wide variety of tools to help users both secure their networks as well as optimize network performance, right? And these devices are, these fully managed switches, they do work in the OT environment, but in most cases, they have so many features built into them, only a few of them are ever really used for plant floor networking. And so the other part is also typically these switches are configured using something like called a command line interface, which is, IT people are really familiar with, they work with every day, but controls engineers not so much. So these fully managed switches typically offer way more features than will ever be used on the plant floor, and also the tools to configure them are typically used by IT experts. So a lot of times it's just overkill.
And on the other end of the spectrum, there are the fully unmanaged switches that may not have the functionality required. What are some of the downfalls or the shortcomings of going all the way to a more unmanaged switch entirely?
What kind of you mentioned in your intros a little bit is that unmanaged switches are plug and play, they're very economical, and offer users really very reliable communications. But I think the main issue with these kind of switches or unmanaged switches is that they don't provide any security features at all, right, which is becoming a growing issue on the plant floor. And then as we have more and more devices that have IP addresses on them, we're seeing users wanting to make sure that they can optimize their plant floor network as well. And that's just something you can't do with a unmanaged switch.
Yeah, in the intro, I also alluded to a third alternative to unmanaged and managed Ethernet switches. What's WAGO's solution, and what advantages does it really represent for the industrial IoT crowd or the OT crowd?
Yeah, so obviously there seems to be a technology gap between these complex, fully managed switches used in the IT world and just simple plug-and-play unmanaged switches. So therefore, what WAGO's done is we've developed a switch that we call our lean managed switches to meet the current challenges of the plant floor, both for security and network optimization. And these switches offer features that are needed for control networks, but they don't have the complexity of full managed switches that you would need in an IT environment.
I think one of the big things that you talk about is really having a more intuitive user interface. You mentioned the command line interfaces for more IT savvy folks. Tell me a little bit more about the more intuitive user experience that you developed, and how does that really support more effective use of the switches from initial configuration all the way through later parts of the life cycle for troubleshooting, security, monitoring, those.
Yes. So first of all, I would say that our lean managed switch are configured by using a web-based management tool. So basically, a controls engineer can use a web browser to configure the switch for security or network optimization, and they really don't need to learn a language, the IT language of the command line interface. So I think it's much easier for the setup of the switch by just basically configuring it via a web browser. And then secondly, our lean managed switches offer a very unique feature, which is basically a read-only dashboard and topology map, where even a plant floor operator could look at this dashboard that has traffic light indicators like in green, yellow, and red, that they can easily see that there's a problem with the health of their network. And even the topology map actually shows what's connected to the switch, and you can quickly identify if there's a red line and something's not connected. Maybe the plant floor operator could even recognize that the system's not powered up and fix the problem without needing to have a maintenance person there. So this can really help reduce downtime, I think, in the long run, and it makes it very easy to set up.
Yeah, I would imagine that not only do you see if the devices you intend to be on the network are there, but if somebody were to add another device, you've got the functionality to tag that as well. Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Are there other specific features that you have on the lean switches that are an advantage over the unmanned switches? Are there other things besides the user interface?
Yeah, I would say, in the world we live in today, right, network security is becoming more and more of an issue, even at the plant floor, right? So a lot of recommendations by security experts to do this defense in depth, right? Have not just one firewall, but you have many different ways of helping to prevent cyber attack. And so our lean managed switches have a number of different features to help with security. I'll give you a couple examples. One example is, most switches the engineers order will have extra ports, right? Because you never know for future expansion or something changes the design, you need more ports, right? But the problem is that these ports then if they're an unmanaged switch, provide access to the complete network, so they're easy to plug into. So one thing with our lean managed switches, we have the ability right through that web interface to disable any unused ports. So even if someone does plug into them, right, that has no effect on the network, there's no access to the network, and they can be easily turned back on if you would ever need them again. And so that that's one easy, simple way to help increase security. Another is really to limit the number of devices on the switch. So the switch has a function where once you have it set up the way the network should be, it can learn the switch will learn what devices are connected to it. And so in the future, if an unknown device gets plugged into the network, then the lean managed switch can block the communication from that device to ensure that someone's not trying to gain access where they shouldn't be.
Yeah, I think one of the other advantages that I was reading about is offering redundancy at the lean managed switch level, which you don't have at the unmanaged switch. Correct? That's one of the capabilities you brought with from the fully managed switches. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, now definitely especially for more critical networks on the plant floor, right? Users want to make sure that if maybe a switch fails or a cable gets disconnected or something gets powered on, a switch gets powered off, right? That your network can still operate efficiently. And so users use network rings to do that. And typically you would need some kind of managed switch to do that. And our lean managed switches offer a couple different technologies to do that. One is rapid spanning tree, and that's a protocol that's been proven in the marketplace. It can have some very complex mesh networks, so that's a nice tool. For simple applications, there's a technology that's called Ethernet ring protection switching, or ERPS. So our lean managed switches support both of those, really to help increase network availability.
It certainly seems to have a great set of functionality that really fits the OT needs. What about if you need to start transmitting data off the plant floor where it might be vulnerable to security risk there? What's what's the solution in a lean managed switch approach?
Yeah, so I mean, there's, typically you would find in a control network, a lot of these switches are locked up in control cabinets, right? So people don't have a lot of, not everybody has access to them. But there's always that issue when you go a long distance with an Ethernet cable, maybe between two different systems or maybe between buildings in a complex. So in those cases, it's much harder to, ensure that data is not hacked. So if you have those kind of applications with long runs, typically you should consider encrypting the data so that hackers can't read the information if they do get a hold of it, and then also that they can't inject messages into the network. So it sounds like a complicated process, but it can be easily done. And our lean managed switches, we have a version of it that can encrypt any Ethernet traffic. And we use a IEEE technology that's called MAC security, or MACsec for short. And this is encryption from point to point. So the data between the two switches is encrypted. So no one can read or hack into the data. And this encryption is done at the hardware level, so no one has to worry about lagging communication. You still have a lot of bandwidth in this type of method of security, data security.
Cool. Seems like a handy functionality to have in the OT environments. Right? So bottom line, what sort of price differential are we talking about when we talk about the managed lean to the unmanaged switches?
Yeah, obviously, I think the issue we try to set out here is when you have a fully managed switch, right, with a lot of features in it. So what we've done with our lean managed switches is we work to price them well below a fully managed switch, and then also make sure that they're only a little bit more than a managed switches. So these switches, I would say, are very cost effective for plant floor networking applications.
Well, thanks so much, Charlie, for sharing your perspective with us today. For those of you listening, thanks for tuning in, and thanks also to WAGO for sponsoring this episode. And I've been speaking today with Charlie Norz, I/O Product Manager for WAGO USA. Thank you, Charlie, for joining us.
Yeah, thank you, Keith.
And my name is Keith Larson, and you've been listening to a Control Amplified podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, you can subscribe at the iTunes Store and at Google Podcasts. Plus, you can find the full archive of past episodes at controlglobal.com. Signing off. Until next time.